So I have a complex fill shape, and on the upper right hand corner we have all of our little tabs. So the first one is just a design tab where you can just put a couple notes or keywords. You can even rate the shape. Personally, I don't really use this, but it is kind of like a feature that can help with organization, or you can write some sort of note just for yourself. This note will pop up on your run sheet if you choose that setting. So if you go to File, Print Preview, in the setting, where is it? It should show the note. Okay, it's at the very bottom. So I wrote notes, note to self. So you can write like a little note about the design. And again, it's just going to pop up on your run sheet. So you can write, you know, this design is made for a hat or something of that nature. And it pops up there. So that's why you might want to use that. So that's the first tab. The second tab is our fill tab. So this is where we are making changes to the fill in of the shape, whether it's a complex fill or whether it's a satin, we will have that fill tab. So the fill tab, it does include different fill types. Now, if you have Chroma Luxe, you're going to have the most options here. If you have Chroma Inspire, I believe it's very limited there, but you have some like embossing patterns. And once you click on the fill type, you'll see that you have plenty of patterns to go through. These patterns here, they just have numbers, they don't have names. And unfortunately, we don't have like a catalog that will show these like in real life. But you can see a small preview here of each pattern. And these are just going to give you like a nice textural look to your shape. So these are definitely fun to play with. You have emboss, you have motif. So motif is going to have, you know, some like special sort of design. A motif is more so like a run stitch type of look. It's not going to fill in completely, so you'll have a lot of empty space. You have shape. You can make different shapes. You have echo, contour. So these are all things that you can just play with and take a look at. You have like contour that's going to sort of make just like a contour shape repeated. Echo, wave. So lots of different things. So again, you can play with those. If we're just on standard fill type, we do have some patterns as well. The most common fill pattern for, my density's up. The most common fill pattern for a complex fill shape is called a tatami stitch. So that's what we see most often when we have larger areas of stitch. And this is just like a completed fill in stitch. The machine just kind of goes like left to right or top down. So we do have a tatami fill, that's most common. There are some other patterns, like we do have a brick pattern that looks kind of like a woven basket. We have corn, that's more of like angular lines. So again, you still have lots of patterns. The one thing I want to sort of advise against is selecting a satin pattern for a complex fill shape. So if you see here the red shape, it's missing all of the stitches because when we do a satin stitch, the satin stitch width can only go so wide because the machine cannot just jump from like 1 point over 2 inches and have like a big long thread hanging. It needs more needle points or anchor points. So you can see I shrunk this shape down on the screen, and now I do have a little bit of fill in this shape. But again, if I wanted it to be satin, I should just make it with my satin stitch tool. Because the nature of this, how it will stitch out, it is going to be a little different. Our editing capabilities are slightly different as well. Like we only have one angle line. The underlay is a little bit different. It's an underlay for a complex fill shape, not necessarily a satin shape. So I would just say try to avoid choosing satin fill or satin pattern on a complex fill. The options below, you have stitch length. So that's actually just the length of each little stitch. I usually just keep it at the default. If you play with the stitch length, you will see the density change, or I mean the stitch count change. So, and you'll also see the look of the shape too. It'll appear differently. So I made the stitch length shorter on this red shape, so I can see that it looks different than if, say, I made the stitch length longer. You will be able to visually tell on the garment, and it will change the stitch count. So if you need something that's maybe a little less stitches, you can increase the stitch length, but you might have a little bit more empty space in the middle. So you have that option. The density is, of course, the distance in between each of those stitches. So the density we can play with a lot, and usually your range will be between 0.3 and 0.5. That's most common. If I go to a higher number, then I have a lot more space in between each stitch. I have, let's say I have 1 millimeter in between each thread there. If I go a lower number, we have way less space, so it fills in. So that's how density is going to work. And again, usually you're between 0.3 and 0.5. On a complex fill shape like this, you can go 0.4 and it will fill in everything very nicely. The next tab over is our underlay tab. So we have different underlays for different shapes, meaning like different stitch types, I should say. So on a complex fill, usually we'll see something like perpendicular or a lattice underlay. You can actually see that some of these are grayed out. So a zigzag, parallel, and center line underlay won't really make sense for a complex fill shape. So I'll go through the differences sort of briefly. If you guys have more questions on the different types of underlay, definitely send in a chat. Let me know which one you're very curious about. But we can take a look at the difference between each of them, and you actually do have a little preview box that will show you sort of what that underlay is going to look like. So a contour underlay is really good for satin stitches. It creates sort of like a nice barrier and a smooth edge for satin stitches. So it acts as like an anchor. And you can see that a contour underlay is just going to follow the contour of the shape. So it's going to follow the outline of the shape. Again, the parallel, center line, zigzag, those are just for satin stitches. Most often we will see a perpendicular underlay for a complex fill shape. And it does just that. It lays perpendicular to the top stitches. So if my top stitches are running left to right, then the perpendicular underlay will run top and bottom. Okay. This type of underlays is standard for complex fill. If we wanted something that was a little bit more sturdy, we could go with one of like the full lattice options, and that it actually does sort of both ways. So if you look at the lattice, that's kind of more of a slanted underlay, so it goes diagonal to your top stitching. The full lattice is going to go both ways, so in sort of an X shape, and a full lattice is going to create like a nice thick base. This is really helpful if you, say, have white stitches going on a black garment. You can add this full lattice and it will help cover up more of that garment. This can also work really well on something that is like more of a fluffy material. You can add an extra little underlay there to really mat down the material. So full lattice, it does have quite a few extra stitches than, say, just a regular lattice. And you can see the difference in the small window. Edge travel is just going to do a little line just right on the edge of the shape. So edge travel is not providing a very good base for that shape. So this one, usually I would not use that personally, because we always want a nice underlay to really support the top stitches. Underneath all of our options, and again, the program will set the default underlay for your object. And also, if you change, say, the style, meaning the fabric, we have, if we right click, we go into utility, then we go into change style. If we change the fabric, the underlay will also change depending on what fabric we choose. So I was actually on fleece, which would provide me a little extra underlay. If I just go to, say, normal, it'll just set like a normal underlay for all of my shapes. So the program does choose for you, and you can most of the time leave it as is, but as you become more familiar with different underlays, it can really, really improve the stitch out if you know what might be best for the material or the shape that you're stitching out. Underneath those options, we do have a couple of settings where we can enter in measurements. And so we have the density. So the density of the underlay is going to be the distance in between each underlay stitch. So 2 millimeters, I have 2 millimeters of space in between each line of underlay. The stitch length is the length of each underlay stitch. The run stitch length is referring to the run stitch that goes down sort of first. Like the run stitch is going to, I'm going to show you guys a slow redraw. The run stitch is like this part where the machine is kind of beginning the underlay. So the run stitch is going to be what you see like right in the beginning. And then this zigzag is my actual underlay. Okay. So I can change the stitch length or the run stitch length. The inset will be how far that underlay is inset from the corners of my shape. So if you have something like small lettering or you have a small shape and you don't want to risk that underlay popping out from under the top stitches, you can inset the underlay a lot more under that shape. So you can change that. And the zigzag inset is just referring to the zigzag underlay for more of a satin stitch. So when I right-clicked, went into utility and changed the style, this function, the utility function, is only available in the upper tier of Chroma, but you can still change your fabric if you have Chroma Inspire. You will just do it in the Tools drop-down menu. So instead of that right-click option, you're going to go into Tools, into General Options, and right on the first page, you'll see your default style. So you can change the style if you have Chroma Inspire, and this is really, really helpful to do before you're digitizing, because it will apply a lot of settings for you automatically that are going to be helpful for that type of material. So if I'm going to design something that is going on fleece, if I choose fleece, the program will change some things like the underlay, the density, the pull compensation for me automatically, and that will definitely help with my stitch out. So you can certainly just keep it on normal, and that'll be sort of like your main settings, like universal settings. But if you know that you're going to digitize for something a little bit different, you know, a towel, then go into Tools, General Options, and right on the top first page, you'll see that default style. So you can change that there. So that's for Chroma Inspire users. If you have one of the other tiers, you will have change style in this menu here. Okay. So we just went through our underlays. The next tab is the push-pull compensation. So I'm gonna explain this using, say, a circle shape, and we can make this complex fill. I'm just gonna change the color. Now, the push-pull compensation, what this is we are compensating for the pulling of the fabric. When we stitch something out, the stitches, the thread, we all should be a little bit familiar with tension. So your threads on the top and the bobbin, they pull on your material. So if you're doing something that is really stretchy, a stretchy athletic type shirt, you're going to have a lot more pulling on the material than if you were to do a very stiff canvas. So sometimes we have shapes that appear really nice on the screen. They look like the width that we want them to be, but once we stitch them out, they might actually look a lot thinner. So if we have, say, a satin column, it might look like the red one on the screen, and then it might actually appear like the purple after we stitch it out. So in regards to a complex fill shape, we might see on the screen we have the orange circle, and then after we stitch it out on the machine, it actually might appear to look sort of like someone said once, like a flat tire. Like it might end up looking like the yellow. Does that make sense? So what we see on the screen is not always how it's going to stitch out, because we do have to factor in the pulling of the material. So what we do here is we add what is called pull compensation. We have different types. You can do a percentage, which would be, let's say, just typing in 120% or 130%. You also have absolute, which is where we're actually going to type in a measurement or a number in millimeters. So I usually do percentage, but either way will work. Now, let's say I did 120% on this yellow shape, right? And you can see that from what it was just prior, the shape changed, right? It looks like on the diagonal, the shape has extended. So when, let's say we're just doing 10%, you can see that the lower left-hand corner and the upper right-hand corner, those have extended. So when we're adding in pull compensation, we're overextending the lines so that we can compensate for the shrinking of the object. So if I look at my outline now, I can see that the pink outline is actually inset to where the stitches are really laying. If we take a look at a satin shape, we have the same options where we can choose, say, a percentage. And let's say I added in, 10% or 20%, then that means that the lines are going to overextend about 20%. So now these shapes really look almost identical as far as the width. So the pull compensation, we have percentage or absolute. It will overextend those stitches to account for the pulling of the material. The value that we have here is the percentage. The B stands for like both sides. So if I would usually enter the number in both instead of like first and second. So that's the F and the S, okay? The max range, we can see that it's 8 millimeters. If we chose absolute, then we would enter in our value here. And again, it would be both sides, and then the F and the S stand for first and second. So you can see I can choose here if I want it to be both or if I want to enter something in first or second. Okay, so I always do both. The push compensation. Push is going to be for our satin shapes. When these stitches lay down on the garment, the actual threads itself, those as they lay down in this left to right pattern, the threads will push on each other a little bit. So what you might have is you might actually have a shape that appears longer instead of thinner. So if you have some columns and you want them to, match up with something else, it might end up looking longer and you have something that looks sort of distorted. So push compensation is going to be for like the top and the bottom of the satin shape. And so again, we have the same sort of options where we can choose which side and we could enter in a value. And if we apply that, we actually see that it shrinks the length of that satin shape. So pull compensation is for, say, like the width, the pulling. Push is going to be for the height, and we're talking about satin shapes. Okay, so if we were to look at a complex fill shape and say add in some push compensation doesn't quite work the same way, but you'll see there will be a little bit of a difference. And again, it's in the like the height. So if we're looking at this round circle, the way that my stitches are running are diagonal. Let's take a look at the orange shape. So I'll show you guys a little bit of a better example. So the way that the stitches are running is left to right. That's where that yellow line is showing me. If I add in the pull compensation, it's going to extend the left and right side. If I add in push compensation, so there's the left and right, okay? If I add in push compensation, it's going to affect the top and bottom. So you can see it actually shrunk down the top and the bottom of this shape because it's referring to how those stitches are going to be pushing on each other, and that could distort your shapes. So hopefully that all made sense. You guys can always ask any questions, just chat them in the chat box. So push-pull compensation. The next setting we have is column. So column will give us a couple settings where we can adjust the the edges of like a shape. So this can be used for, like, the reason why we might want something to be jagged is if you're making something like grass or like hair or something where, let me see. Something where you need the one side to be uneven. Sorry, I was just at a loss for words. So if I type in like a value here, we have jagged type, and you can see on one side of the satin shape, it's like very jagged here, and on the other side, it's not. On a complex fill, let's do both and just enter in like a value, and you can see I have on each side, it's very jagged, it's not straight, okay? So column, you have jagged type, and you can do that. Again, it will be for something like you're making some grass and you want it to be like really jagged, and you can make that just with one click. So you can play with the type, like none, both, sides, one side, first or second. You can play with the value, and that's how it would look. The purple shape here, or this complex fill where I have like little hairy looking sides. The lower part of this option, we're under column, where we have split satin. On a satin shape, we can really only have a satin be so wide, and then we start to lose stitches like that. What we can actually do is we can split the satin, and what that means is it's going to split this shape into, say, half or 30%. And what we see here is, I'm going to change the density just so we can see a little bit better. You can see that the needle is actually going to make a little pit stop. So if we do percent and we split it half, 50%, you can see that down the center of this beige shape, I have some needle points. So it's actually splitting the satin stitch, allowing me to get this satin shape to be much wider. Now I'm over an inch wide. If I didn't split, I'm missing stitches because the needle can't travel from left side to right side without making a little pit stop in the middle. We're going to have a super long thread just hanging. The machine won't recognize it, so you can split it, and that way you get a really wide looking satin shape. And what you can do is you can split it in different ways: percentage, absolute, random. So if you wanted to split it randomly, you don't have that clean center line. You'll just have something that looks more like this, where the machine will kind of stop at different points in the center of this column. Okay, so split satin is really helpful if you want to get like a wider satin column. And you can play with those settings and just changing, say, the distance 50%. If you set it lower, it's going to stop only 20%. So you might need to make some adjustments there. Okay. Okay. So jagged type, so that's under column. So any questions on that? Let me know. The next tab is we have general, which general is going to refer to two kind of different things. We have here connection and we have gradient. So let's take a look at a complex fill shape. And if we look very closely at the stitches, I'm going to look at the very corners. So the very corner of this shape, our connection is referring to the way that the machine is making a corner. So we have a chiseled corner right now. So you can look at the very edge of this shape and see that these stitches are kind of making a little triangle motion. They're chiseled. If we change it to square, you can see that now they come out, they do like a little extra stitch on the edge, and it'll go back in. So what I'm looking at, I'll try to highlight maybe with the shape. What I'm looking at here is these corners. So if you guys can see what the yellow circle is highlighting, that's what we're looking at, is the connection type. So that's a square. It's going to add a little bit more stitches. So your stitch count will be higher if it's square. If it's chiseled, we see a little point. So you can change the measurement, the max density. So that's the corner. If we look at, if we look at gradient, this is going to give us the effect of something that's either starting small and then getting bigger at the bottom, or vice versa. So the gradient is for that like specific shape that you have. And you'll see you can do sort of just like a gradient fill shape. So maybe you had just some object or some sort of design element where you need the stitches to be a little bit more spaced out at the top. So the gradient is really easy to use, and there's actually a way that we can blend in some colors on the next tab, but you have gradient option there. So for the satin, we have a couple extra points. So we have a zigzag, we have sharp, we have still chiseled, and we have square, which doesn't quite show on a satin. zigzag and sharp, they're really just giving you like a different angle of how the machine is connecting. And we still have the gradient option where we can do something like that, and we'll have our stitches start small at the top and get larger at the bottom, and you can change the maximum density to get a different look. So speaking of gradient, the next tab is where we can, let me turn that off. The next tab is where we can actually blend some colors together. So if I want this satin column to be red and orange, I can add a second color layer. Choose the color number, so orange is color chip 4, and I have now two colors blended together like that. If I chose gradient here, then it's going to actually change the second color layer to be that increasing, decreasing, convex, or concave. And from there, I can play with the density and the max density. So the density would be the distance between, the first couple stitches, it's 1, and the maximum density, maximum 4 millimeters in between each stitch. So if you actually change this to be like lower density, and then this maybe could be higher, you have more of a range. We can actually add in a third color. So if we add a third color, we just need to select the number. So let's say I add green. Now we have 3 colors blended together. And you can do this on a complex fill as well. So if you wanted to add in some more colors on a complex fill, you can really blend up to 3, and you can make them gradient if you need to. So, so definitely a really cool feature to have is the blend tool, because you can easily blend, like let's say we make some text, you can easily blend some threads with text, and it will give you a really cool effect. So I'm gonna choose something different. So we have our letter. Anytime we're gonna make some changes to text, we'll right click, break up text, and I can go into the blend tab, can add a second color, and let's say we want to add a little bit of bright orange. Apply. Maybe I change the density so it's a little bit wider, and then you have some cool letters. You can make like a nice sun, waves, anything that you might need to blend some things together. So I like that setting a lot. And yes, this is only available in Luxe. Okay, so let's see, let's go back to our other shape. And so we went over blend, super fun to play with. The next tab over is our commands tab. This is super helpful for trimming. So the command tab, we do have the ability to change the color here. And anytime I've been changing color, I've just been selecting the object, and then I've been right clicking on a color chip. So you can easily change color just by right clicking on any of your color chips, or you can select the object and you can change the color number in the command tab. So my color chip number 4 is orange. So I can type in 4, click apply, and it will change the color that way. So it's just another way to do it if maybe for some reason you don't have a right-click function like on your mouse or your trackpad, but definitely the right-click is going to be the quickest, easiest way. So you can change the color. You can add in some commands. Now, our machines, the machines, they do commands automatically. These are really for some machines. They don't automatically make like a stop or a jump. So you can do a couple of commands here, like the sequin, borer on, off. You need to have a boring machine. You need to have a sequin device. Low speed and high speed. Our machines will require you to choose the speed on the panel. So again, some of these are catered to different machine types. The Chroma machines, they'll do a lot of these things automatically, or you'll enter in that command on the panel itself. But you do have some commands here. Now, the one command that we might use a lot is our ending command, and that will be helpful for trimming. So if I have like a bunch of shapes that are close together, all these little red shapes, and I see these jump stitches, I could actually add in an ending command, and the ending command, I can do a trim, and that's going to tell each shape, or it's going to tell the machine to trim after each shape. So essentially you're telling the file to, at the end of this, trim, and then the machine reads the file and it will trim. Okay, so ending command, we can do a trim. Tie in and tie off, these are different ways to create a knot. Now again, our machine does automatically do tie in and tie offs. Like it will create a secure sort of knot on the design, so you're not going to have unraveling. But the reason why we have different tie-ins and tie-offs are for maybe different materials. And you can see if we look at some different, like a triangle. Okay, so if we're looking at this little red run stitch here, that's a triangle tie-in. So you can see the top of the shape has a little triangle. A line is just going to kind of go back and forth in the same line. So kind of start, it will go back, then go forward again. Basic is just your normal basic tie-in and tie-off. If you have none selected, you're fine with that, because again, the machine, it knows to make a little knot, so you're not going to have your stitches unraveling. So some of these settings here, again, our Chroma is a program that you can use with any other embroidery machine, and sometimes you have to tell the machine to make that little knot, so just for certain other models. So tie in, tie off. So if we look at the bottom of this run stitch, we can also add, oops, there we go. We can add a little triangle tie off, and it makes like a little triangle knot. So we're looking just here, okay? So we have, let's go back to our command, tie in, tie off, and trim branches. This is going to refer to text. A branch is actually connecting the top of a lowercase j or the top of a lowercase I. So this little stitch here that we have that's separating, or I mean connecting the little j and the I, that's a branch. That's not necessarily considered a jump stitch. So what we can do is we can trim branches. So if I always trim the branches, then you see the top of the J and the top of the I are trimmed. On this text, we actually do have a jump stitch that's between the U and the L. And in the command tab, under text commands, you will see that you can trim in between characters, and now I have eliminated that little jump stitch. So if you're talking about text and those jump stitches, you'll see text commands pop up, and you can trim between characters, words, lines, or if it's longer than a certain length. Colors, so color changing, that is also a command. The machine would see this name and it would just only allow me to choose one color. If maybe I want each letter to be a different color, I can color change in between characters. Now I have 5 different options to choose from. So even though it's red, pink, green, orange, if I load this onto the machine, then I'm just gonna select whatever colors I want. I could do red, white, red. So it's just telling the machine that, oh, each individual letter is able to have a different color. Okay, and then lastly, and then I'll take a look at some questions. So the last box here is our transform. So pretty self-explanatory, just where we can enter in a specific size. So if I need this to be 3 inches wide, I can add in 3 inches. You can actually change like position on the screen, and you can mirror, we can rotate. So if we want to rotate it to a certain angle or degree, we can mirror, we can flip. Okay, so transform option at the very bottom or very last tab. But again, we can always transform just using this black box. So if I wanted to like enlarge this, or if I wanted to like angle it, I can use the little pink rotating. I can, shrink it. I can make it like really short. So you can transform just using the black box and sort of dragging those little corners in or out. So that will be fine to use as well. Okay, so let me take a look at some questions. We have a question from Joan, and I'm just gonna make a little satin. So on the, I believe it was in the column tab, deactivate splitting if length is less than deactivate splitting. Let's try it out. So to be honest, this one I might have to find out about that. So Joan asked, what is deactivate splitting? And you know what? I would have to ask why we might need that, because yeah, I'm not sure. I'll find out though, and I can let you guys know for sure. This little box here at the bottom. Sydney asked, how do I create a running stitch for a customized patch? Well, a run stitch can be made in a couple different ways. If, let's say, you do have a circle patch and you want to make a run stitch for placement, like you want this run stitch to go down on your garment so that you know where to place the patch, you can use the artwork tool. So you have all of these different shape options, and I just made an ellipse. So holding down your control key will make a perfect circle. And from there, I can select the circle and just tap on the auto digitizer, and it will make a run stitch of that circle. If you do have plus or lux, you can also right click and you can convert it. So you can convert it into a run stitch. You can actually convert it into a steel stitch if you have lux. So that would be more of like that satin look. So you can make a run stitch that way, or you could just, if it's like a custom shape, let's say it's sort of like a mountain patch, and you need to make like a mountain type of shape with your run stitch, then you can just create the shape manually and close it off. So you can draw whatever you might need with your run stitch tool, or use the artwork tool and then auto digitize it into that shape. So hopefully that answered your question. Nancy had a question about how do we tell the design to stitch out in the center of the hoop we choose? Well, as long as your design has a correct center point, then the machine will automatically center your design in the hoop. That doesn't mean that the design will stitch beginning from the center. So if we have a shape, or let's say we have a design so here's our design. That red and green little shape in the middle of the blue triangle, that is our center point. Chroma will automatically put the center point in the middle of your design. So now I have two triangles, and we can see that the center point is in the middle of both. If I add in 3 triangles, the center point moves. If I add in 4 triangles, the center point moves. So Chroma will assign the center point of the design right in the middle. If we go into File, Print Preview, we can also see that big crosshair, that's my center point. So the machine will automatically place the center point in the middle of your hoop. You're selecting your file first, then you're selecting the hoop, and that's when the machine recognizes the middle point of the file and places it in the center of whichever hoop you might choose. So if we're talking about we want the design to stitch beginning from the middle going outwards, like if we're putting this design on a hat, I don't want it to stitch red, blue, purple, purple. I want the machine to stitch from the middle of the hat going outwards, because that way we have less chance of the hat being the fabric being pushed into the middle. So if I need to resequence how this stitches out, then I can select my objects and I can say I want this purple shape to stitch first. If you right click and you go into order, ordering the shapes are placing them in the arrangement of how they will stitch. So if I order this shape to the back, that means that this purple shape is actually going to stitch first. So there's the purple, then it's going to do red, blue, and the other purple. So I placed this one to the back. If I want maybe the blue to go next, I can right click, order it backward. So to back will go all the way to the back. Backward will go just one level back. If I want, let's say, the red to stitch out last, then whatever is on top or on front will stitch last. So center point and where the stitching begins is going to be different. So Nancy, you want to make sure that your design has the center point actually in the middle of it. And the machine will automatically center that design in your hoop. Mark, your question about a file type. So a customer had sent you a file that is a .dat file. So I'm not sure if that file type is a digitized format. .dat, it doesn't sound like a digitized format. You can actually see, oh, it's a Baruden, yeah. So you can actually see if you guys go into File Open, you can see in Chroma the files of type. You can see what formats Chroma will open. So .dat, it actually is, so right here, Baruden has different formats that it will take. So .dat is a Baruden machine format. So our machines only take DST. You can see that here, Ricoma, Tajima. So you can open your .dat format, and then you just need to go File, Save As, and save it as a DST for our machines. So if you have a question about, some formats, you can look here, and you can see like what Chroma will be able to open. So a lot of common machine formats, even some others, like Chroma can open like an AutoCAD file. Lots of different options there. If you're wanting to bring in an image file to digitize over it, you're not going to go into File Open, you're going to go to File Import. So if you have a PNG, then you're importing that instead of opening it, because Chroma is really opening formats that have been digitized. So Mark, you can definitely just resave it as a DST, and then you can print your run sheet if you need to, or if you have the original, that would be better. So, yes, so Nancy, you can, HUS is definitely an option. I know that Chroma has, that's a Husqvarna Viking, so you have HUS. You have your brother formats too, because that one's very common. And yeah, if you guys have any other questions, so the one thing I am going to check on is deactivate splitting, because I'm not quite sure how to fully answer that, how that works. Any of the tabs that you guys might want a review on, or if there's something that I didn't answer, definitely chat it now. And hopefully you guys learned a lot. Definitely lots of options there. You guys can always sign up for more classes. The topics will vary, and we will go through some different things each time. So I think the next class is tomorrow. If you haven't already signed up, the window has closed, but if you guys didn't see the class tomorrow or didn't sign up for it yet, you can always request to join just by emailing service@ricoma.com. If you guys would like the recording of this video, also please email service@ricoma.com and just put the date, February 17th webinar, and that way I'll know which webinar to send you guys, and you guys can get the recording and download it. Okay. I see we have a couple questions about the run sheet. So the run sheet, like if you do have a different file format, if you open up that machine format, you will actually see that it's going to be the incorrect colors because a DST doesn't hold the actual color information. Like usually we're telling the machine what colors, but if you were to open up, say, your HUS file or your DAT file and you need the run sheet, you just go into File, Print Preview, and even if it has incorrect colors, I can at least see that, oh, the first step is the background and the last step is the little envelope. So if I need this just to be pink and red, I know where to assign the color. If I need this heart to be white, you know, I can see, oh, well, step 3, I'm not going to choose green, I'm going to choose white. So you can still use a run sheet from like a DST or other format, and even if it doesn't show the correct colors right here, you can see how it is sequenced out. So that can be helpful. But yes, usually you're going to want the original embroidery file, like the design file, and this shows me my original colors. So for Chroma, the RDE is the working file type. Always keep your original RDE, because if I need to make a change to this, I can easily change it and I can see the correct colors. If I'm trying to edit from a DST, we have what looks like this, and now everything's all segmented. It's going to be really hard for me to make edits here, and then of course I won't have the correct colors. It's just assigning whatever colors it has on my color chip bar. So always keep the original RDE file when you're digitizing. This is what you'll edit from. This is where you'll see the colors, the correct colors. This is where you can see, you know, what underlay you chose, what density you chose. So the original RDE. And then if you need to print out the run sheet, File, Print, Preview. And in the run sheet, you have some settings. So I always like to have some of these checked on. Like it will show me the hoop, if I chose a hoop, shows me the stitch count, the sewing time, shows me the crosshair, that's the center point, and I can see in the next page it shows me all of the little sections in the order that it will stitch out.